Good morning, one and all. Today I am going to introduce the fourth unit in software architecture. The name of the unit is called Creating an Architecture 2. In last class, we learned about how to create an architecture 1. Okay. In this class, we extend that concept with creating an architecture 2. So here we need to learn what is the importance to create an architecture 2, but how to create an architecture 2. Okay, now here we are going to learn these concepts. The first concept is documenting software architectures. So first we need to learn what is the importance of documentation of a particular software architecture. So once they create an architecture, so why we need to documenting an architecture? So in this, the first concept is uses of architectural documentation. So when we create an architecture, for that they are maintaining documentation, they are creating documentation. So why the architect, the designers are uh, documenting an architecture? So what are the main uses of documenting an architecture? Here we are going to learn. So the importance of documentation. For example, as a final year students, so you are doing a project in 4.2. Okay, so you have to maintain the documentation also. We need to submit a record a report at finally what you are did. Okay, now which type of algorithms we are using, which type of language we are using to develop a particular software, which type of diagrams we are using to design it. Okay, now what are the modules we are dividing the entire the project, how to interface the modules, how to generate the reports. So finally these all are we need to documenting. Okay, now we need to prepare one documentation. Okay, now that is a project records. Okay, like in the form of. So why we need to creating a documentation? So what is the use? Here we need to know the creating a documentation for software architecture. That is the meaning of creating an architecture too. Okay, once we create an architecture, the architect or designers, they need to create the documents according to the particular architectures, created architectures. That's the meaning of creating an architecture too. Okay, now we need to discuss the importance or the uses of architectural documentation. Okay, the architecture of a system depends on the requirements laid on it. So first we are creating an architecture. It's how it will be created. It mainly depends upon the requirements laid on it. So first, when we saw the SDLC life cycle, for what is the first phase? Requirement gathering phase. Okay, na? That's why. Okay, na? This entire the system, this entire the architecture is mainly laid or depends upon the particular requirements of a system, architectural system. Okay, now so to does the documentation for an architecture depends on the requirements lined on it. So while we need to creating a documentation, so we are also add create the documentation according to their requirements. So which type of requirements we are using, based on these requirements, how the documentation, how the architecture is created, how it's laid on it. We need to prepare the documentation according to the requirements also. It is how we expect it will be used. So the what these requirements is says is, so while creating an architecture with the help of these requirements, so how we expect it will be used. ఎలా యూజ్ చేశారు ఈ రిక్వైర్మెంట్స్ని ఇన్ ద క్రియేషన్ ఆఫ్ ద ఆర్కిటెక్చర్. సో దిస్ డాక్యుమెంటేషన్ says as, okay na. So when they are creating a similar type of architectures, or when the new architects or new users want to learn about it, this documentation helps that particular persons, okay, or users or clients or stakeholders, whatever it may be. That is the main thing of documentation, okay na. It says is how we expect it will be used, okay na. Next, documentation is a decidedly not a case of one size fit all. It's not a case of one size fits all. Once we create a documentation, we can't say this documentation is fit for all architectures or creating the particular supposed architectures, okay na. We can't say it's not fit for all, but it is gives guidelines to the particular stakeholders. It should be sufficiently abstract to the quickly understood by new employees. So we can't say it is fit for all, but we will say the audiences, for stakeholders, it quickly understood, for whom new employees or new users or new developers or new creators. So the stakeholders are different types according to the situation, according to their requirements, according to their needs, but those persons are easily understood the particular scenario of creating an architecture with the help of this documentation. Okay, without that we can't understood quickly. That is the main thing, okay na. And without that documentation, the new user, the new employees are not understood quickly. It takes time, okay na. So here the money equal to time, according to our lives or according to business, okay na. So we need to save the time while doing some process. So we want to save the time, we need to understood properly for it without delaying the things to do it, okay na. So that's why we need to understood that properly. That is the main reason. The new employees, the new users or the new stakeholders wants to know clearly, they need some guidance. That guidance is provided by the particular documentation. This is helpful for them for quickly understanding, but sufficiently detailed to serve as a blueprint for analysis. So this documentation is also provide some blueprint for analysis. Analysis means what? Already I told so many times in the previous units also. Analysis means what is existing. So what are the drawbacks in this existing, how to prevent them in future, okay na. That is future expectation, okay na. That is analysis. Based on this existing, they can analyze the things, they can understood the things, they can find out the drawbacks, and also they want, and also they want to update something according to the current technology by using the current updates. So that is will be expected to the future products, okay na. That is provides the blueprint for a future analysis. And architecture documentation is both prescriptive and descriptive. That is the very important, okay na. Architecture documentation is both prescriptive and descriptive. Prescriptive means what? It predicts something. Descriptive means it's elaborate, it gives the clear things. That is the meaning of prescriptive and descriptive. This is for some audience. It prescribes what should be true by placing constraints on decisions to be made, and for other audience it describes what is true by recounting decisions already made above a system's design. This is for used for some persons to prescribe the things, constraints on decisions to be made. కొందరికి డెసిషన్స్ తీసుకోవడానికి ఇట్ విల్ బి హెల్ప్. అండ్ ఆల్సో సమ్ ఇట్ ఈస్ హెల్ప్ఫుల్ ఫర్ సమ్ ఆడియన్స్. ఇట్ డిస్క్రైబ్స్ వాట్ ఈస్ ట్రూ బై recounting decisions already they are taken, but they need to analyze on the particular things. That is the meaning of recounting the decisions already made about a system's design. That is the meaning of prescriptive and descriptive. And all of this tells us that different stakeholders for the documentation have different needs. So above whatever we can see the above points, what they tells is different stakeholders have this different uh, needs. Yes, ma. We are our customers having the different needs. Okay, now the vendors or the business persons, they want to satisfy the needs of the customer. So according to this, the needs of the customers. So uh, with the help with the different stakeholders, it tells the documentation tells the needs and requirements of the customers in different kinds of information. What are those needs? Some persons, they want different kinds of information, different types of information, and different levels of information. So we required some requirements at somewhere else in entire the product, in entire the project, in entire the architecture, not all the system. Okay, now we want to know something else about it, some artifact, not entire the system. So and also some different treatments of the information. So according to that different kinds of information, somebody wants different levels of information, somebody want, and different treatments of information somebody wants. So we need to satisfy different types of stakeholders. Definitely we need the documentation. This documentation helps to the particular persons. Okay, and we should not expect to produce an architectural documentation and have every consumer read in the same way. Rather, we should produce documentation that helps a stakeholder quickly find information that stakeholders is interested in. Okay, now that is the main thing. It not to give the 100%, but documentation gives the stakeholder the quickly information. So that is the very important to the particular stakeholder. Based on that, they will be interested on the particular documentation with minimum information that is irrelevant standing in the way. So everybody, the stakeholders doesn't want irrelevant information. Irrelevant means what, ma? It's not related to the particular task of them. Okay, and that is irrelevant information. They want relevant information, so that gives the benefits to the particular stakeholders. This might mean producing different documents for different stakeholders. So according to that above point, what it means, it producing different documents for different stakeholders more quickly. It means producing single documentation suite with a roadmap. So this documentation is nothing but a roadmap. What is the use of what is the roadmap in general? So the roadmap says what, so from source to destination, it says the path, how we will reach the destination from this starting point to ending point. The starting point is the source, the ending point is the destination, but it gives a roadmap how we need to reach the particular destination. What are the easiest ways to reach the particular destination? We are having some direct ways, we are having some shortcut ways. So like this we need to go. Okay, na? But this documentation helps the stakeholders in the form of a roadmap. It gives that some ideas, it gives us some thoughts, it gives some destination points to the particular stakeholders. That is the importance of a documentation, that will help different stakeholders navigate through it. That is the meaning. Navigation means what? Searching. We are go through it. We are navigating the web browsers. Why we need to navigating web browsers? We want to search something, we want to know something, we want to learn something about our required concepts. So when we are involved in that, in this particular roadmap in the form of a documentation, so it will the stakeholders, the users will navigate through it. They will understood their points. According to that, they need to implement the particular architecture and whatever it may updates. That is the main importance of these documentations. Okay, now one of the most fundamental rule for technical documentation is it is general. Generally, the technical documentations are general, and software architecture documentation in particular. సో జనరల్గా వాట్ ఎవర్ ద టెక్నికల్ అప్డేట్స్, ఏదైనా సాఫ్ట్వేర్స్ వచ్చినా, ఏదైనా యాప్స్ వచ్చినా, అవన్నీ కూడా జనరల్గా ఉంటాయి వాటి యొక్క డాక్యుమెంటేషన్, వాటి ఫండమెంటల్స్ కానీ. బట్ వెన్ యూఆర్ కమ్స్ టు ద సాఫ్ట్వేర్ ఆర్కిటెక్చర్, డాక్యుమెంటేషన్ ఈజ్ పర్టిక్యులర్. So why the clients want their own respective needs. The client want like this, I want this type of requirements, I want this type of language, I want this type of softwares. Okay na, it is particular. The customers are two types in general: general customers and customized customers. Customized means what? They have their own requirement, they want the particular product according to their requirements only, some specified requirements. Okay now, that's why based on that the software developers can develop the particular particulars. Okay now, like this documentation is used. Some we can, they are performing some documentations, they are creating documentations for general, and also they are creating some documentation in particular for software architecture developments. Okay, it is to write from the point of view of the readers. Documentation that was easy to write, but it is not easy to read. Okay na, writing of the documentation is easy, but reading of the documentation is difficult, not to be used. And easy to read, it is in the easy of the beholder. Okay na? And understanding who the stakeholders are and how they will want to use the documentation will help to organize it and make it accessible to and usable for them. We said that the primary purpose of the architecture was to serve as a communication vehicle among stakeholders. The main importance of this primary purpose of this architecture or the architecture documentation is what? It serves as a communication vehicle among stakeholders. Okay, now most of the users, they read this, they can communicate with this. It's this documentation is seems like an communication vehicle among stakeholders. That is the main importance of this documentation. Okay, what I put, whatever the words I put in a different color, those are the main highlight points in this documentation. When you remember this, we need to make the sentences easily. Next, documentation facilitates the communication. As I said in the previous, it's a communication vehicle to the all stakeholders. That's why it facilitates the communication. That is the main importance of this documentation. Some examples of architectural stakeholders and the information they might expect to find the documentation. In addition, each stakeholder come in two varieties in general, seasoned and new. In generally, the stakeholders come in two varieties. In general, seasoned and new. Seasoned wise stakeholders ఉంటారు, new stakeholders ఉంటారు. A new stakeholder will want information similar in context to what this seasoned counterpart wants. సో సీజన్ వైజ్ కస్టమర్స్ ఏవైతే యూస్ చేస్తారో దానికి డిఫరెంట్గా ఈ న్యూ యూజర్స్ అనేవి ఉంటుంది. బట్ ఇన్ సిమిలర్ అండ్ మోర్ ఇంట్రడక్టరీ phrases. That is the thing. In general, the stakeholders come in two varieties. What are those? Seasoned and new. And architecture documentation is a key means for educating people. So that is the main thing also. The architecture documentation is a key for what? It's educating the people. That is the main importance of documentation. It educating the people. So it educating the stakeholders. Why? We who need an overview. In general, ఎవరు ఈ డాక్యుమెంటేషన్ మీద ఇంట్రెస్ట్ చూపిస్తారు, ఎవరిని ఎడ్యుకేట్ చేస్తుందంటే ఇట్స్ ఎడ్యుకేటింగ్ డిఫరెంట్ టైప్స్ ఆఫ్ స్టేక్ హోల్డర్స్. దే ఆర్ ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ న్యూ డెవలపర్స్, funding sponsors, visitors to the project, and so forth. It's educating the new developers and who are funding the sponsors on the particular products, on a particular architectures, and visitors to the project. So some of the persons are come to visit these things. Okay, now they are reading, while they are reading this documentation, educating the particular people, educating the people. That is the main importance of this architectural documentation. Architectural documentation is a key means of educating people who are educated by this documentation. For example, new developers, funding sponsors, and visitors to the project, and so forth, and different. Perhaps one of the most aware consumers of architectural documentation is none other than the architect at the same time in the project future. And also, the new architectures are interested in learning how their consumers of architectural documentation is none other than the architect. At some time in the project's future, either the same person or a replacement, but in either case, someone guaranteed to have an anonymous stake in it. New architects are interested in learning how their procedures tackled the different issues of the system and why particular decisions were made. So this documentation helps the particular avid consumers so of architectural documentation. So is who are the avid consumers is none other than the architect. Okay, now that is the person is architect. At the same time, the project's future, according to that project future. Okay, now so it's the same person or a replacement, but either case some guaranteed to have an announced anonymous tag in it. Okay, this documentation helps the architects are interested, new architects for new architects are interested in learning how their procedures tackled. It's this documentation helps a new architect for which purpose, for what purpose? Sorry, for what purpose? In how interested in learning how their procedures tackle with the difficult issues of the system and why particular decisions were made. So in some situation వీళ్ళు difficult situations ని tackle చేశారు and how they are taken the decisions in the particular difficult situations when they came while creating an architectures. So they want to know something about the architects of creating the architectures, who create the architectures. The documentation helps new architects with respect of these points. That is the main thing, how the documentation is useful for the particular new architects also. For example, you can consider one example. The customers had a problem. So, however, in general, the customers having a problem, they wanted to the architecture based development. So, they want the architecture based development, but they had a small development group. They are having some small development group, and it would take several years to internalize all the we had show them. So they have some small group, but what will be happens, it will take several years to internalize all the we had show them. Okay, in the meantime, okay, in this particular meantime, it's takes some time, and in the meantime they had products to make and contract to meet. They just did not have the reasons to do all of what they had seen. Okay, according to this also situation also, we need documentation. We need something, we needed something to let them get started on the architecture path. So while it will take the some lack of so much of time, so in this situation they needed something to go forward, to get started where they stopped. That is a thing in this, without having to understand everything involved. So without understanding it is difficult. So they want to know something where they stopped. Then at the point they want to start the particular thing. This discussion turned to documentation. So finally, at the end, what they want to see again, they want a documentation. The discussion is want to turn into documentation. And the book we were writing on documenting software architecture. At the same time, they also discussed, and the book we were writing on documentation software architecture. So they want to realize something, they want to stop somewhere else. In this case, they need something, they also search for something, that what documentation. That's why they want to maintain and they want to writing the documentation of a particular software architecture. That importance is a software architecture documentation. The customer was interested in documentation as a means of maintaining corporate knowledge about their products. The customers also need documentation, they also interested in documentation. Why, what means that, that maintaining corporate knowledge about their products. This documentation gives the corporate knowledge. So it means every day the technology is changed. So according to the technology, according to the corporate based, according to the competition wise, they want to develop the new products, they want to update the technology. So they want to update the technology, definitely the documentation is important for them. Okay, now that's why the customers were interested on in documentation. So they want to develop their products. We ended this meeting agree to do an exercise in architectural reconstruction and to document the results according to the principles. That's why they want to reconstruct the architectural documentation according to their results, and also they can follow some principles. So that's how much the importance having to the particular documentation. And I had always thought of documentation as the tail end of the design and development process. This is one of the important point. It had always thought of documentation as the tail end of the design. It is the documentation is a tail end of the design and development process. Okay, now it is necessary for all of the reasons that architecture is necessary. So the documentation is necessary. Why? Because the architecture is the necessary for all reasons, for communication, for analysis and education, but it is a derivative, not a driver. It's derivative, it's not a driver. And it lekapothe nadavadu ani em ledu, it's but it is derivative. Okay, it's not a driver. Driver means what? It moves forward. Okay na, without having we can't move అని చెప్పడానికి లేదు, but it's not a driver, but it is a derivative. Okay na, it's compulsory, it's important, it's derivative, it's important for our work. That's the main reason. So that is the importance of documentation. So as we said previous, according to, so we know what is the documentation. Okay, now how much the users are having according to the documentation. The documentation is main depends upon the requirements laid on it. The documentation is not a case of one size fits all, but the documentation provides the detailed blueprint for analysis. The documentation is a prescriptive and descriptive. It is it's the documentation provides some kinds of information to the particular person, some levels of information to the particular person, and different treatments of the information according to the users. But it is a roadmap. The documentation is a roadmap. The documentation is according to technical wise fundamentals. The documentation is in sometimes it is general. According to the software development wise, it is particular. The documentation is provides the it is nothing but a communication vehicle. It provides the communication among the stakeholders. The documentation facilitates the communication. Okay, now and architectural persons also. The documentation stakeholders come into two varieties, seasoned wise and new also. The architectural documentation is a key means for educating the people. The people in the form of different ways, new developers, funding responses, visitors of the project and all. And it's mainly used for interesting and a particular procedures also. The documentation is mainly gives a corporate knowledge about the products, and the documentation follows the principles according to the document reconstruction. So the documentation is a tail end of the design and the development process. These are the multiple and examples our users we are having regarding documenting a software architecture. I hope all you understood. So what is the uses of documenting software architecture, how it's useful for the stakeholders, how it is useful for the new developers, how it will useful for the particular visitors, how it will useful for the developers, how it will useful for the new architects, how it will guide the architects who design the particular architecture for the future. So these are the so many uses we are seeing in this lecture. Okay, and I hope all you understood importance of the or uses of the software documentation. In the next class, we are going to learn about views, types of views, and choosing relevant views and other concepts. Okay, and documenting views, and also we can documenting a behavior and documenting interfaces, and then we are going to learn about documenting across views. Okay, I hope all you understood. Thank you one and all.